This episode is brought to you by Hasa. Liquid is clearly better. Liquid chlorine is the highest purity, works immediately, has no added cyanuric acid or calcium, and it will leave your pool safe, clean, and clear. And by the bottom feeder professional grade battery powered vacuum system. It sucks to clean pools, so cleaning pools sucks less. Get $100 off with code DVB100.
This episode is brought to you by Skimmer, the #1 pool service software in North America. With Skimmer, you can streamline your schedule, grow your revenue, and keep your customers coming back with 5-star service. Whether you're a one-person operation or an established team, Skimmer is your partner in success. Visit getskimmer.com/poolguy to try Skimmer for free for 30 days.
The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show.
Hi, welcome to the Best of the Pool Guy Podcast Show. Bob Lowry will be talking today about high cyanuric acid and why high cyanuric acid in a pool really is a problem. Now, there's, of course, a debate on both sides of the argument, but I think Bob Lowry is the expert in the industry, or was the expert in the industry, and here you can hear him talk about why high cyanuric acid is a problem in pools. Are you a pool service pro looking to take your business to the next level? Join the Pool Guy Coaching Program. Get expert advice, business tips, exclusive content, and get direct support from me. I'm a 35-year veteran in the industry. Whether you're starting out or scaling up, I've got the tools to help you succeed. Learn more at swimmingpoollearning.com. You're the inventor, I don't know if we mentioned that, but you're the inventor of liquid pool conditioner. Natural Chemistry sells that. And so you know a lot about cyanuric acid, of course, from that. And I strictly use liquid conditioner. I love that product. Even though it's more expensive, I know that it's bulletproof as far as the side effects of the other one. We'll talk about that too later in this recording. But what is a good cyanuric acid level, and why is cyanuric acid even important to have in the pool?
Well, cyanuric acid, we used to think that cyanuric acid, all it did was protect chlorine from sunlight. But cyanuric acid actually works as a buffer against the pH going down. It controls the amount of chlorine that's available in the pool to kill things. And the information has been around for a long time, but we haven't drilled down to the part of, actual use, practicality of it. But the fact of the matter is, if you have any more than 30 parts per million of cyanuric acid in the water, 97% or more of your chlorine is bound to that cyanuric acid. Now, it doesn't mean that it's not available. It means it's bound to it, and 3% is available right now. If that 3% gets used, then it gets replaced from the 97. And it keeps getting replaced, but it keeps that 97 and 3% ratio, it keeps that equilibrium ratio maintained. So the more cyanuric acid you have in the water, the more it slows down the chlorine. As you get really high, it ties up most of the chlorine, and you need even more chlorine to get an amount of chlorine that's enough to prevent algae and bacteria in the pool. And we've done a lot of calculations to be able to simplify all of those calculations. And what it came down to is that I recommend that you keep a chlorine level that is 7.5% of your cyanuric acid level. And that is in a pool without borate in it. So it's 7.5% of CYA. And you can then see pretty quickly, if you get up to 100 parts per million of cyanuric acid, you'd need 7.5 parts per million of chlorine. And nobody wants to keep that amount of chlorine in the pool. But that's what you need to prevent algae. And so if you keep a lower level, say at 50, then you would need 7.5 times 50, which is about 3.5 or 4 parts per million. So it still is a little bit high. But if you put 50 parts per million of borate in the pool, you will only need a chlorine level that is 5% of cyanuric acid. And so you could go all the way to 100 parts per million of cyanuric acid, still only need 5 parts per million of chlorine in the pool.
That's
So,
interesting.
and if you have 50 parts per million in the pool, you can put 2.5 parts per million of chlorine in the pool and prevent algae and bacteria. And we can do the calculation. If you take, for instance, if we know that 3% of chlorine is available, and we know that of that 3%, you have seen for years, I'm sure, you've seen that when you put chlorine in water, you make HOCl and OCl minus, the killing form and the non-killing form of chlorine. And at pH 7.5, you have about 50% of each. So what that means is that if you have 3% of the chlorine in the water is not bound to cyanuric acid, then 50% of that, or 1.5%, is HOCl. And we know that it takes 0.05 parts per million of HOCl to kill algae. And algae is harder to kill than bacteria. So if we kill algae, we've automatically killed the bacteria. But using those numbers, we can calculate whether or not we can kill the algae. And so if we have 2 parts per million of chlorine in the pool, and only 1.5 of it is HOCl, 1.5%. If you take 1.5% of 2, you come up with 0.03 parts per million HOCl. And I just finished telling you we need 0.5 parts per million HOCl to kill the algae. So 2 parts per million won't do it. And if you take 3 parts per million times 1.5%, you come up with 0.45. And that's right at the edge of killing algae. You technically need 0.05, and that's 0.045. So you're close. And if you take 4 parts per million, for instance, 4 times 1.5% is 0.6 parts per million HOCl. So we know whether or not you've got enough algae in the pool to kill anything. And instead of doing that calculation all the time, we can tell you it's 5% if you use a borate or 7.5% of CYA if you're not going to use borate. And that's a real easy way to know how much chlorine to put in the pool. And if you do that, the advantage of it is that you're not going to have any algae, period. And you will use less chlorine because the chlorine that's in the water doesn't have to kill the algae when it starts to grow, because borate's doing that. So you will be using less chlorine if you use borate. Your chlorine generator will run less if you use borate because you don't need as much chlorine. So there are those advantages to doing that. So the proper level for cyanuric acid is between 30 and 50, and 50 is probably better. And that has to do with sunlight degradation. But the only asterisk to that is if you have a chlorine generator. And my recommendation for when you have a chlorine generator is to use 70 parts per million of cyanuric acid. And the reason for that is that in where you are making chlorine, there's a high concentration of chlorine in the water, and it can use up all of the cyanuric acid. And when it uses up all of the cyanuric acid, then you have chlorine going back to the pool that's unprotected from sunlight. And sunlight degradation is very fast. And so as the water, and the chlorine returned at the surface where the sun is the strongest, the rays of the sun are the strongest. So when we if there's chlorine coming out of the return line that's unprotected, it can get zapped pretty quick by the sunlight. So we want a higher level so that all the chlorine that's made gets protected by cyanuric acid.
And the Pool Guy Podcast Show has teamed up with UPA to bring you affordable, reliable liability insurance starting at just $64 a month. Get up to $2 million in coverage, and the members of my coaching group get an even lower rate. Protect your business and your peace of mind. Sign up with UPA today by clicking the link in the podcast description. That makes a lot of sense, and if someone can probably replay that and listen to the numbers again, because you're just doing this off the top of your head, which is pretty amazing watching you do this, But so a pool that has like 200 or 300 parts per million, now you can see the problem with that cyanuric acid level so high, because then if you use that 7%, you need to have a pretty large amount of chlorine in there, the parts per million, in order to prevent algae growth. And that's why you see a lot of...
If you had 200 parts per million of cyanuric acid in your pool, you need 15 parts per million of chlorine.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can see, and that leads us to the problem of using trichlor, because you can see the number is this: that for each 10 parts per million of trichlor, of chlorine you put in the pool using trichlor, you put in 6 parts per million of cyanuric acid. And most pools in a week in the summer, use about 10 parts per million of chlorine. So your cyanuric acid is going to go up by 6 parts per million per week. And so in a month, it's going to go up by 25. So in a month, it's going to go up by 25. And if you keep the chlorine level where you kept it last month, you're going to have algae. So you need to add more chlorine because now your cyanuric acid level is higher.
Yeah, so it's a vicious cycle, basically.
And then it's just a vicious cycle. And, cyanuric acid builds up. You have to put more chlorine in. Put more chlorine in, the cyanuric acid builds up. And it just creates that vicious cycle. So what I recommend is maybe using trichlor till you get to 50 parts per million, and then switch to using liquid chlorine. And liquid chlorine, the only problem that there is with liquid chlorine is that you may not be able to put in enough to last for a week, because you'd have to put in 10 or 12 parts per million of chlorine per week. And that means that on the day you're there, the chlorine level may be pretty high. So you don't really want to do that. And the option then is to leave a gallon of chlorine or a half gallon or whatever with the homeowner and ask them in the middle of the week to add it. The other thing that you can do is put in a liquid chlorine dispenser. And one company makes one, HASA makes one that's called the Liquidator. That's a tank of chlorine with a valve on it. And other people use like a Rollichem or a Stenner or one of those peristaltic pumps, and they dispense an amount of chlorine into the pool that's equal to about 1 part per million per day. And that's the same as using a trichlor feeder and adjusting it so you got some chlorine when you come back at the end of a week.
If you're looking for other podcasts, just go to my website, swimmingpoollearning.com. On the banner is a podcast icon. There'll be a drop-down menu with over 1,900 podcasts for you there to listen to at your leisure. And if you're interested in the coaching program, you can learn more at poolguycoaching.com. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Have a great rest of your week. God bless. This episode is brought to you by HASA, providing products that deliver clean, healthy water for every aspect of everyday life. The bottom feeder battery-powered vacuum system, portable, powerful, and only weighs 12 pounds. And Skimmer. Get Skimmer, America's #1 pool service software. Podcast listeners can try Skimmer for free at getskimmer.com/poolguy.